All right, I think we're going to get started. We are at 26. Folks will be trickling in. So we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's AITP special event. I am Neelu Shah, President of the Association of Information Technology Professionals here in Los Angeles, and I'm so glad you could join us this evening. We have a fantastic program lined up. Our special guest is none other than Peter Coffey, a name many of you already know and look forward to each year. Peter has been a longtime friend of AITP-LA, and he always brings fresh perspectives that challenge and inspire us. This evening, he'll be sharing insights on achieving AI agency. It's a fantastic and timely topic. So before we start, let's cover some logistics. Most of the meeting, if you can have your mic muted so that we don't disrupt his speech. And towards the end, you'll get a chance to ask questions. You can post your questions in the chat or you can unmute yourself for questions. Uh, Feel free to connect with other attendees in the chat. And we are going to record this meeting, and this meeting recording will be posted on our website after the meeting today. So before we start, a little bit about AITP-LA. So we are a nonprofit association dedicated to empowering IT professionals like you. We offer a range of programs, including in-person dinners, virtual and in-person meetings, and networking events designed to foster both professional and personal growth. So why do we do this? To keep you informed on cutting-edge trends, best practices in technology management, and to create powerful networking opportunities. So our membership is as diverse with IT execs, professionals, consultants, attorneys, educators, and students. Joining AITP LA means connecting with industry leaders, enhancing your skills, and staying ahead of technological trends and building relationships that matter. Speaking of connections, here is our AITP LA board for this year. This team is working hard to bring you a full lineup of enriching events in the year ahead. Many of them are here with us tonight, so
Good,
if
Allison. Who
please
taught me to make this?
don't hesitate to say hello and connect with our board members. We are also always on the lookout for passionate volunteers who share our vision. So if that sounds like you, we would love to hear from you. And you can chat with any of the board members or you can email us at info@aitpla.org. Currently, we do have an open position for facilities chair. So this position person would be looking for event venues and coordinate the event logistics. If that sounds interesting to you, so please message us at info@aitpla.org. We are also looking for venues for our in-person events. So if you know a company or your company who would like to host us, we will really appreciate that. We get about 40 to 50 people for capacity in terms of capacity, and we are mostly looking for West LA. So anything in Culver City or West Los Angeles area for our venue. Our events are typically third or fourth Thursday of the month in the evening from 5 to 9 p.m. And we take care of dinner and drinks, and we do have insurance. So if you can support us, that'll be really great. And now, talking about our next event in October. So, our guest speaker for October is Holly Choi, who is the managing director of IDER, Entertainment ID Registry, and president CEO of OTT.X. So, she's going to bring an interesting and relevant discussion on the world of Hollywood and AI, what you need to know. So, it's going to be on October 29th in Culver City. And please join us as Holly speaks about the issues that the entertainment industry faces as AI emerges as a player in the game. And you can hear from her how AI is being utilized and misused and affecting the industry. What are the pain points with business uses, content creation, and compliance issues? These are the biggest concerns affecting the entertainment industry in LA and globally. So we hope you will be able to join us. Stay tuned for the newsletter where you'll get information about how to register. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jay Carvin, who's our Vice President, to take it forward.
Hey guys, thanks for joining tonight. If you're not a member already, feel free to look at some of the awesome things that we have going on. Just by simply joining today, you should be getting our newsletter. The newsletter will come up with all of our upcoming events. Becoming a member gives you opportunities to network with peers, industry experts, and engage directly in person and this time virtually. Most of our events are in person in the LA area. Membership also gets you free or discounted access to all AITP events, as well as partner events, along with discounted conferences and forums in the LA area. So today, as a special incentive with the access code coffee, you guys can join. You can either scan the QR code with your phone on the screen, or I'm gonna put a link here in the chat, and that'll be an easy way for you to quickly sign up. So, but remember, coffee, all caps, is the access code to get $25 off. So the full membership is only $50 today. Corporate sponsorship. So if you or your organization are interested in investing in this community, we have corporate sponsorship options. And since all of the board members are unpaid volunteers, all sponsorship funds go directly to our events. If this sounds like something for you, feel free to direct message me in the chat, and I'll connect with you after the event. Big thanks to our current sponsors, iSpace. iSpace is a global services company focused on information technology services, business process services, location-based services, and healthcare solutions. And if you're looking to hire the best in IT staffing, be sure to reach out to Carol Schlocker on our team. She's very committed to, and she does a great job at finding the right person for any company. The official cybersecurity summit, you guys are probably, many of you, familiar with it. It's rated a top 10 InfoSec conference worldwide. It's held in major cities across the US, connecting senior level executives with renowned information security experts and cutting edge solution providers to protect today's enterprise. And last but not least, we have Open Classrooms, which is a social impact B corporation that offers low cost apprentice staffing service for local hybrid apprentice roles, as well as free online mentorship and upskilling training programs to your staff, funded by federal and state grants. We actually had someone who wanted to make an announcement, but I'll do it on her behalf. She's not able to make it today. And so it's from Open Classroom. So, you know, what's interesting about this organization is they're a division of the Department of Labor, and their whole goal is to help people find jobs and remain employable by providing industry relevant skills and coaching. So you can hire someone in IT, data analytics, Python scripting, cybersecurity, or digital marketing for just $25 an hour, which I think is pretty cheap. You can interview and pick the person you want. They're trained and mentored weekly by some industry experts, and so they can take on real tasks on day one. And then if you're not hiring, but rather looking to upskill yourself, they offer free training in all those fields. So it's pretty cool. If you're interested in either of those options, want to learn more, I'm going to put the contact information for the representative Jenna Fuentes in the chat, and you can feel free to reach out for any more information. So I'm going to pass it back off to Nilu to introduce Peter.
Okay, and now I'm very excited to welcome our esteemed speaker tonight, Peter Coffey. Peter is the president of the Foundation for Intelligent Life on Earth, and he'll be sharing with us a year of lessons learned, along with pragmatic outlook on what's ahead as agentic AI moves from the end of the beginning into a true body of both technology and practice. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Peter Coffey.
Thank you so much. You hearing me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's see if I can take over the screen. Do not attempt to adjust your horizontal or your vertical. Are you getting my title slide now?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Then let's get this done. I'm going to be talking tonight about AI agency, and these terms, availability, accountability, and actionability, are a list that I found coming into my mind when I wanted to talk specifically about the use of what are sometimes called AI agents or autonomous agents in the specific context of the public sector, because there are so many areas in which the services on which we rely as individuals and as corporations and as a society are taxed, or taxed, an interesting word, use of the word. We are perhaps undertaxed in that we do not, pay enough in taxes to staff agencies at the level that we would really like to have. Things like, the lines at the DMV and so on. There's been tremendous improvement over the last few years in many areas. I remember when filing one's taxes used to be going down to the local copy shop where they had the binder of the heavy duty original forms and getting the ones you needed reproduced. And now, of course, we just download the PDF. In fact, the Missouri tax return is a marvel of an auto-completing PDF, whereas you fill in fields, it does the math and populates it for you. It's not really an application, but it's a very, very smart form. The question now is, how do we go beyond that, not merely to automating, because automation takes a process that's exceptionally well defined, completely reproducible, static enough that it sits there and waits for you to target it, and instead build things that are capable of dealing with changing situations, interactions across silos, imprecision in the use of language, richness in the kinds of input they have. Like, can you show me with your camera a picture of the thing you're talking about? These are all areas in which there's enormous opportunity, but also enormous, frequently unappreciated challenge, and a considerable degree of hype. And so we're going to get into all of these things this evening over the next, say, 45 minutes. Um, the word agent has been around for a while. It appears in many contexts. We have agents for all sorts of things. We call our federal and government agencies, agencies. And interestingly, the word agentic has emerged as a adjective for platforms that have agentic capability. And this is the Google Trends curve, starting right around the end of 2022, when things like ChatGPT sprang upon popular consciousness. And as you can see, the interest in this term agentic has just skyrocketed during the time since then, from essentially zero to a maximum level only a couple of weeks ago. Maybe a little bit of dying down as people think they know what it's about. That may actually be a problem. But the word has been around for some time. When I was, getting my MBA back around 40 years ago, there's a scary thought. We had to, in our business law class, talk about the law of agency and the role of someone who represents you as an individual, represents your company. But the first definition in Merriam-Webster is one that acts, one that exerts power. This is very different from what we've asked AI to do in the past. We've asked AI to answer questions, but we have not connected it with the mechanisms and the means of taking an action on our behalf, something that's capable of producing an effect. And interestingly, the definition number 3, a means or instrument by which a guiding intelligence achieves a result. This is interesting to me because people so often now are saying, well, these agents are autonomous. I'm not a huge fan of the idea that the agents will be genuinely autonomous. I think the presence of a guiding intelligence, the presence of, as we said at Salesforce during these last few years, not merely in the loop, but a human at the helm of these interactions, is something that I think we don't want to give up. And we want the escalation of a non-normal, non-standard situation to a human to be frictionless, seamless, inviting, instead of having people be terrified that they're going to have to start all over again. But the idea that it's an agent means that it takes actions, and the actions have effects, and the effects are a result that's desired, maybe if you're very, very lucky, intended by a guiding intelligence. We can talk about whether it's only useful if it can do things that we didn't anticipate that it would do, that we want it to occasionally surprise us, certainly with the things it offers to do. Maybe not so much with the things that it actually does do. But the word agent normally has been associated with, shall we say, elites. Call my agent used to be something you said if you were in the entertainment industry, or if you were a high-profile CEO, someone who needed the services of an agency like the one that was satirized, if that's the word, in the TV series Flack, about the things that people would do on your behalf without asking you, because they knew they would what you would want done if you even knew they were possible. I mean, they were agents. They were autonomous. They did stuff that you might even want to have plausible deniability they would do. I'm not sure if we're ready to go to that point with software agents. Or Jerry Maguire, again, someone who, as an agent for an athlete, undertakes negotiations, brings to bear knowledge of context and expectation that the athlete with their own specific expertise might not have, but that they want to have working for them. And there's another interesting idea. It's an agent when it has the ability to draw upon bodies of knowledge, bodies of procedural capability that you can comprehend but don't actually have for yourself. Now you start getting into areas of needing to trust in some degree of autonomy of the agent. And that's a really interesting gray area in which to be. And then, of course, there's always secret agent. The idea that, agents definitely are out there doing stuff that you might not want to have to admit you knew they were doing. Again, I'm not sure that's where we want to go. But the idea that agents used to be, as I say, tools of the elites, and now we're talking about making them available for everyone. Well, what has to happen for that to be even possible? We'll talk in a moment about desirable. Well, first of all, bandwidth has been growing like crazy. As many of you have heard me over the years point out, bandwidth has grown more quickly than the so-called Moore's law rate of growth of, roughly doubling every 18 months or whatever. The global character of bandwidth and the fact that there is literally 3 to 5,000 times the capacity to move data around that there was at the time that the first iPhone, which wasn't even a 3G device, was originally deployed back around 2007. This makes so many things possible. Things that made AI something of a laboratory curiosity, an academic field of inquiry, not really a practical production tool, are alleviated considerably when we can measure a process, measure events, observe what's happening instead of relying on people to observe it, code it, and report it. This is critical. And appreciating that foundation of availability of bandwidth is necessary, because anything that messes that up is going to vitiate all of the promises and hopes for this technology. As we move from what may be, in the words of my colleague Peter Schwartz, a brief golden era of a genuinely global internet, to one that is more firewalled, more geopolitically divided, we're going to have to figure out what we do to get back that level of global interchange of data that we've been taking for granted, candidly, for maybe the last 20, 30 years. Once you have the connectivity, how do you make sure it's not just serving the elites? Well, fortunately, we have another thing coming along, which is the second of several parts of this availability revolution or evolution, which is ubiquity. The number of mobile phone subscriptions active on the planet today is greater than the number of human beings. And you'd say, well, how is that even possible? I don't know. I've been carrying 2 phones for years. I'm moving myself back closer and closer to having just one phone number, but many people carry more than one. They may have seemly or unseemly reasons for wanting to partition their communication channels. But the interesting thing, of course, is that landline phone subscriptions have actually been in decline for some years. And many assumptions that a phone number is associated with a physical location, like a home, as opposed to a phone number being associated with a individual identifiable human being, maybe, device, maybe, process, a document. I mean, there can be phone numbers that result in you dictating into some shared document. Phone numbers have become a very interesting instrument, and there's a reason why now there are so many of them. But you can almost assume almost assume that anyone who is playing a part of any kind in a process will be reachable by a wireless mobile connection, to the point that the UK government is actually now instituting a government app where the primary means of delivering government services will be by this method, where if you visit the Getty Center Museum in Los Angeles, it is assumed that you will be able to tour the exhibits without needing to check out one of those old audio tour devices merely by downloading an app to your phone. Doesn't everybody have one of those? The previously elitist assumption of making something only available on phones has now become almost a democratizing thing. I just had a conversation today with a charitable organization that wanted to produce a handbook for use in a youth education program, and we were talking about they were talking about the cost of estimating and producing the copies. And I said, why are we even talking about ink on dead trees here? Why aren't we talking about building an app? Because high school students, middle school students, in fact, often elementary school students have that access. This is necessary if agents are going to be something that's not just a white glove tool for the elites, and it has to be scalable. I keep having to update this number. At the moment, roughly 2/3 of all the human-built satellites orbiting this planet are Starlinks. That's just the Starlink constellation. There are also several others growing and chasing Starlink's tail. But the old joke about the Iridium constellation being broadband for penguins is starting to ring a little bit hollow now that Starlink is up there essentially making the entire planet reachable at the level of almost every square meter of the planet's surface with high speed connectivity, whose cost is rapidly going down. And with all that connection, all that ubiquity of access to the connection, the ability to exchange data over that connection through your phone, it becomes tremendously important to appreciate that the capacity of the computation is still very much on a logarithmically straight line, which is to say a hockey stick curve, if that were a linear vertical scale. The vital necessity of being able to do something with that information and not just have it be a system of record, not just have it be an archive of what has happened, but something that can be in real time telling you what is happening and has some prayer of being able to predict it as well. It ain't slowing down. And in fact, just today, notice the date on this slide, September 25th, just today it became known that Huawei has put out a 3-year roadmap, which is really quite different from the approach to scalability of computation that is being put forward by NVIDIA. And I love this line from the writer who said, NVIDIA is playing chess while Huawei is flipping the table and dumping a million checkers on the board. There are genuinely different philosophies at this point of how to deliver computational capacity with exceedingly powerful chips or with massive quantities of much simpler ones where the connectivity and the interoperability of all of those is a challenge in itself, but where your ability to produce them and to ship them in areas where highly complex chips might be considered a sensitive product and subject to various trade restrictions, these introduce amazing options. Those of you who've been coming to these talks with me, for several years, I guess decades is more like it, will remember that we went through similar discussions back when Intel and AMD were moving very much in the direction of more and more complexity on chip, while at the same time others were moving in the direction of the so-called RISC or reduced instruction set machines, which had a much smaller vocabulary of native operations, but could handle them at much more devastating and dizzying speed. An interesting parallel definitely is apparent here because people would say, I had Intel vice presidents say, well, the 386 architecture will never run at a speed of greater than about 300 megahertz. Well, that's interesting because people clearly have multi-gigahertz CPUs in their laptops today, and some of them are still x86. But when you look under the hood of a modern x86 processor, what you see is a RISC chip with a tremendous amount of cosplay going on in which it pretends to be an x86 while actually under the hood adopting the economies, efficiencies, and much greater speed capacities of an underlying RISC architecture. Meanwhile, Apple is doing crazy stuff. I mean, genuinely crazy stuff, having moved from the PowerPC architecture to the Intel architecture, demonstrating in the process that software emulation, which people had always said would be too slow to be useful, could in fact be done so transparently that people didn't even notice it. And now I'm running an M4 chip in the laptop that I'm giving this talk on tonight. It used to be that I could open a laptop and wait a moment for it to wake up from sleep mode, and these things are literally awake by the time the lid is up. The degree to which I can now feel that the silicon is keeping up with me is simply different from what it was only single-digit years ago, let alone double-digit years. And the thing I really want to leave you here with is not only is the growth of computational capacity and cost effectiveness still genuinely hockey stick exponential, but it's not yet possible to say who's going to win or if there even will be a winner. You've often heard me compare what's going on in physical hardware to what's going on in your own biological hardware. When you touch a hot object and you jerk your finger away and then notice the pain, a very small, very local, exceedingly fast, but very simple network has gone from your fingertip to your spinal cord through a reflex arc and jerked the finger away before the slower message exchange with your brain says, ouch. And then a somewhat longer exchange around the parts of the brain says, well, this thing should never be that hot. Maybe I should file some kind of service notification here. And then an even slower network running merely at the speed of electrons is going to be circulating out through the routers and filing that trouble ticket. What's happened there? 1, 2, 3 networks in your head and body alone, plus the network you use to report it to other people, have all meshed together without you consciously having to do a handoff from one to the other. I think it's one of the miracles of network architecture in the world today, and it's where we have to go with the networks that we build, just as nature has gone with the networks in which we live. But that brings up the subject of the capacity. And I'm putting a question mark on this one because people are starting to notice the staggering amounts of space, clean water, and electric power. Things are going on. Is someone able to go on mute because I'm picking up additional audio from the background? Thank you. More than 140 activist groups in 24 states are identified by Data Center Watch as actively opposing the construction of these massive data centers. I think this is a transient problem. I do, because I think that the architectures of these centers will be on a slower but still meaningful curve of increased power efficiency, more and more use of non-polluting power sources, including wind and I'm going to say nuclear because it's not carbon emitting, even though there are waste streams associated with it. I think this is going to be a case where it's about timing, but we need to keep an eye on this question of, are you building something that uses massive capacity to do things in a very inefficient way, like just hoovering in whatever data the internet has, which has all sorts of other issues of model collapse and other things? Or are we going to start going, and I will talk about this in more detail later, are we going to start going in the direction of, just like your body and brain and internet around you do, multiple nodes of intelligence with focused data sets that can function usefully with far less aggregate power consumption? And watching the direction in which this goes and getting it right is, I believe, going to be the key to people doing this at scale in a way that's robust enough to be part of the way we live. Which brings us to the second evolution, which is accountability. Back in 2024, a long time ago, the European Union published a massive document called the AI Act, and many people at the time said, oh, good, now we know what the rules are going to be. And within about 48 hours, I was saying, don't be too quick to declare victory here, because there are multiple reasons why that's really not the case. One of them is, and this is just the timeline that's right here in front of you, look at these dates. AI Act applies to products required to undergo third-party assessments, does not happen until 2027. Other things like general applicability are still not happening until almost a year from now. So these rules aren't even considered to be in effect until a year from now. And some of you will remember seeing this cartoon a year ago from me when we were talking about the notion that rules would be in place by 2026 to cage a beast that will have considerably grown during that time. I have watched now for decades the efforts of well-intentioned goodwill regulators trying to figure out ways to write rules that can characterize and prescribe and direct processes that the regulators do not understand, and the side effects of taking perfectly ordinary administrative tasks and turning them into criminal acts. An employee leaves your company, you purge their email account. Bang, you've just violated a GDPR clause that says that data originated by a person may not be manipulated or destroyed without the notification or consent of that person. We all know, as a matter of common sense, that the emails you did at work are not your personal property, but there's room for disagreement, and it's going to keep a lot of lawyers busy as the case law gradually emerges. Here is something that I did not show a year ago. I mentioned it briefly, but I wanted to show you specific examples. These are actual clauses from the so-called EU AI Act, which I have pointed out as, like the Pirates Code in Pirates of the Caribbean, not so much a code as sort of guidelines. Here's Article 130, Section 138, for example, which uses the phrase member states should. There are 12 occurrences of the phrase member states should in the EU AI Act. Here's a particularly interesting one. Member states should ensure that their national competent authorities establish at least one AI regulatory sandbox. Yeah, that would be a good thing. They should do that. But all it says is should, because there is not actual enforceable, really, teeth in the EU AI Act. It is a list of statements about how member states should pass actual legislation in their various governmental architectures to achieve these agreed upon goals. And then there's 9 more occurrences of member states may, which is even less, shall we say, toothsome than member states should. Member states may decide to appoint any kind of public entity to perform the tasks of the national competent authorities. Well, okay. We can't even call that wiggle room. That's room to do the hula. There is so much left to the shared commitment to carrying out the spirit of the rules that the UAI Act is a great framework, but for anyone to say, okay, well, now we know what the rules are going to be, is just premature and wildly in excess of what the actual rules can guarantee. And then I didn't call this one evolution 2D, I called it evolution 2X, which is the aggressiveness of the newly declared, as of January of this year, policy of the current US administration that, that act or that executive order in 2023, safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence, that's now a revoked executive order. And the new executive order, 14179 from the beginning of this year, says the policy is to sustain and enhance America's global AI dominance, and that heads of agencies shall suspend, revise, or rescind any actions that would be inconsistent with that policy. I'm not saying this is wrong, but it definitely is different, and it definitely changes the likely behaviors of corporations, governments, the concerns and responses of various stakeholders to this question about, well, what's the guiding set of principles going to be? Are we going to do that which can be done safely and with respect for privacy? Or are we going to do it? And you may have heard the expression, the Schmidt test. Eric Schmidt once said that if you don't know what a server does, unplug it and see if anybody complains. we're sort of applying a Schmidt test here. We're going to do it, and then if we're not happy with the consequences, we'll try to contain them afterwards. This is rapidly evolving. It could evolve as soon as the next election or even sooner. It could evolve as corporations say, hey, you know what? When we're seen to be pursuing an agenda of American global dominance, it makes it more difficult for us to form the international consortia and the partnerships and patent cross licensings and things that we need. And so, perversely enough, a policy that's explicitly trying to enhance global AI dominance might actually wind up being a handicap. And it's going to be crucial for people to pay attention to this stuff. It would be really great if we could say, oh, this is for the lawyers and the diplomats and the politicians. No, we're all going to have to be aware of this, because things like the relationship between a Huawei and an NVIDIA, or an NVIDIA and an Apple and an ARM, these go across national boundaries. They go across cultural mindsets. They go across entire divides of what patent law even is or does, and other intellectual property protections. So I'm afraid this is one of those things where we just all have to have a level of awareness that might be more than we really wanted to have, as I think most of the people on this call think of themselves as being more in the technical realm. We don't get to say this is someone else's problem anymore. Now, I said agents used to be deployed by experts. They sort of used to be deployed by people who were functioning at a level where some knowledge of the rules could be expected. Agency law, it's a common law doctrine. It's been around that long, and it has concepts like express authority and implied authority, which are actual authority, and then something called apparent authority, which is a very interesting idea, where an agent has apparent authority when a third party reasonably infers that someone is authorized to act on a principal's behalf. This is already getting kind of warm and fuzzy, even before you start throwing in questions about what you can ascribe to a piece of hardware in terms of anything resembling a moral compass. I bring this up because it reminds me so much of a conversation that I had with someone in the Federal Trade Commission years ago, when he said, just because you're adding on the internet to a description of a crime doesn't mean you need new law to deal with that crime. If you have fraud, the elements of fraud, undertaking fraud on the internet is not some new thing called cyber fraud. It's just fraud. But you need to make sure that the rules you have and the definitions you have of legal limitation or legal obligation are not embedded in past technology. I'll give you my favorite example of this. In the United Kingdom, someone was being prosecuted on a charge of fraud for having used a stolen credential to gain access to a financial account. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we call, cybercrime. It happens all the time, right? And I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said he was being prosecuted for forgery, not for fraud, for forgery. He basically like faked a signature. This thing, if you pretend to put someone's signature on a document, that's forgery. It's very straightforward. And the judge is interrogating the prosecution about the elements of the crime, because forgery is the use of an instrument to gain unauthorized access to an asset for purposes of gain or other malfeasance. And the judge asked the prosecuting attorney, is the Crown prepared to introduce into evidence the instrument that was used? And the lawyer kind of scratches and said, well, Your Honor, the instrument that was used was a pattern of bits in a computer. It no longer physically exists. I mean, normally you'd be able to say, hey, here's the document with the fake signature on it, and the forensic analysis of the signature and the ink prove that it's fake, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now this could not be done. And the judge kind of hems and says, okay. And what about the asset? Well, the asset, Your Honor, was a series of transactions that the defendant, gained access to them for purposes of maliciously understanding and interfering with someone's trading patterns. So the asset no longer exists either. And you can tell that everybody's getting very nervous here, because what the judge said, What happened here was probably a crime, but the definition of forgery that's in the statute does not encompass these facts or these behaviors. And if Parliament wants this to be a crime, they're going to have to rewrite the law to cover it. And that, I think, is the more interesting question. Not do we need new laws for new behaviors, but do we need to figure out how existing laws unconsciously assume limitations of physical or analog technologies and need to be, kind of refreshed and, reworded in ways that preserve our understanding of what you should not do, and state that understanding in ways that are compatible with the way a computer might go off and do it. It's going to be an interesting period of time in the legal profession, because now we're talking about agents being under the control of and serving people who maybe don't have the same level of expertise and conscientious attention to detail that we used to be able to assume that anyone who had an agent knew what it meant to have an agent. Now everybody's going to have agents. And this is something that you've seen me quote before in previous talks from Doug Lana about what happens when you let a robotic chauffeur drive around your street. And think about all the things you would want it to know. You'd want it to know that a ball bouncing into the street is likely to be followed by a child. You'd want it to know that if you have a choice between hitting the ball or hitting the child or hitting the tree to the side of the street, you don't want to hit the child, even if hitting the tree is going to total your car. You need to be able to make that decision quickly enough that the child doesn't get hit by the car. This notion of embedding common sense knowledge in an executable form and making it readily retrievable quickly enough that action can be taken upon that knowledge is something that this transcends the great laboratory demos. This is something where if you're going to let a car be driven by an autonomous agent around a neighborhood with people in it, you're going to have to figure this out. It's been observed that once we have maybe a sort of herd immunity, once 80 or 90% of the cars are being driven by autonomous agents, the level of safety may go up because these things won't surprise each other. Right now, the problem is that an autonomous agent sees a yellow light, follows the rules, slows down, anticipating that it will stop for the red light, when the person behind the self-driving car is accelerating on the assumption that the driver ahead will accelerate through the yellow, and rear-end accidents occur. The mixture right now of normal, common, everyday human behavior and also regulated and following the rules behavior of cyber agents is probably going to create a lot of friction and pain as we move toward a process of, as I said, sort of herd immunity, where almost all of these things are happening. But that's going to take some time. And time is an interesting thing. We talk about the problem that large language models are trained on whatever data they can find on the internet. And the question of what are the limitations that result from that kind of training? And it's a really interesting question, which I'd like to demonstrate now with something that came to my attention through one of the blog sites that serves the people who are interested in wristwatches, which is an interesting community. These are wristwatches. You may never have noticed this, but now that I'm pointing it out, you will never be able to unsee this. Almost every time you see a picture of a clock, a wristwatch, in an advertisement, it will be displaying a time sometime around 10 minutes after 10. It's been shown psychologically that the hands in this V shape convey a feeling of a smile, which makes people just feel better looking at it than if the hands were showing like 820 and the frown was upside and it was a frown rather than a smile. It allows the manufacturer's logo, which is typically up there near the 12, to be visible. On Apple watches, it shows 10, 10, and 30 seconds, which has the hands evenly spaced around the circle. And again, now that I'm pointing it out, you will never be able to unsee it. When you flip back and forth between faces on your Apple Watch, the new face appears showing a time of 10:10 and then rotates the hands to the new position, which I know people with Apple Watches who think that's completely nuts. That if it's showing 7 minutes after 12 on your current face and you flick the face, there's no reason why it should start all over again at 10:10, but it does. Well, this is a wristwatch. And anything that does generative AI pictures of wristwatches has probably seen untold numbers of images of wristwatches showing the time 10:10. So I asked one of the AI image generators. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm momentarily blanking on which one it was. Stable Diffusion. I asked Stable Diffusion to show me pictures of wristwatches displaying the time 3:25. No, those are showing 10:10. It doesn't actually know anything about what the position of the hands on the watch face means. It knows that a wristwatch looks like this. It has no semantic distinction between the hands of the watch, the index marks on the watch, whether it's Arabic numerals or Roman numerals. If you ask it for a wristwatch, it's going to do its best, and it's going to come up with this. But maybe I'm asking for too much, because after all, even human beings don't necessarily read analog watch faces anymore. Jimmy Kimmel went out on the street and asked teens and college students to read the time off of an analog clock face, and they found it surprisingly difficult. Or maybe it's not surprising. Maybe it's only surprising to people my age. It is now commonplace for people not actually to be able to glance at a clock face and quickly tell you approximately what time it is. So maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe we should just, ask the AI for a picture of a digital watch showing 3:25. It should be able to do that, right? Nope. Does even worse. 2:25, or not even a recognizable number at all. Again, it knows what time it is, but it doesn't know what time is. And I think this is one of the most apparent and concrete illustrations I can offer you of the distinction between the seeming ability to do smart stuff and the extraordinarily shallow comprehension of what this thing is talking about that it has. And this will hurt us if we see faces in the clouds, if we impute intelligence to something because of certain complex behaviors and fail to appreciate how superficial its understanding of the situation may actually be. This was also mentioned, and some of you have seen me use this example before, in 1979 in James Hogan's book, The Two Faces of Tomorrow, when he has a hypothetical lunar construction crew ask an AI to remove a ridge of landscape that's in their way, and it says, any constraints on that? And they say, no, just get rid of it. Well, the AI is in control of the mass driver that's launching payloads of rock into Earth orbit for orbital station construction, and realizes that it can retarget those payloads and destroy the ridge by bombing it with rocks. And the workers are nearly killed. And later on, when they analyzed the system, it seems very proud of itself because it came up with this original solution. No one told it that killing people was a bad thing. It never occurred to them that something whose job was to dispatch bulldozers was going to wind up being able to take an action autonomously that might result in people's deaths. And as we start talking about the ability to take action that has effects at the direction of a guiding intelligence, but maybe not with the awareness or the supervision of that intelligence, we're going to have to start asking questions about how do we tell it what it's not allowed to do without having to enumerate all the things that it should be instructed it should never do. Which brings us to this subject of action ability. It's not difficult to build an agent that consults one data source and takes one action. That's not hard to do. In fact, it's really just an algorithm. It's really just a program. But it only gets interesting, really, when agents can interoperate in ways that weren't completely predefined or completely prescribed. And so it's great that we now have protocols, standardized mechanisms and languages and notations emerging already for agents built by different parties to have a reasonable chance of cooperating in ways that are somewhat pluggable and robust. Two different kinds of protocols already. Model context protocol, which is really about the data exchange and tool sharing. Can they figure out what each other are able to do, and can they exchange data to enable that to happen? And something a little more interesting about agent-to-agent protocol, which allows you to do more of a pieces of the task kind of decomposition. Both of these are going to be necessary, and we're working now on an industry standard called an agent card that kind of exposes the means by which you can ask an agent to do things for you. Finding ways to make this manifest is really important to being able to do genuinely interesting things. So we can do multi-system requests. So you can have a workflow that might involve your finance system, your IT system, your HR system. Being able to make sure that the person who shows up to execute a service operation has current certifications, which might be an HR thing, has the necessary equipment, which might be something that operates out of, like the motor pool or the equipment room, has the time required to do the job. Now you're talking about a scheduling thing, and that might go into payroll questions like, is overtime authorized for this person? You can quickly see how being able to do something like dispatch a technician to solve a problem with the confidence that they'll be able to do it on the first call instead of having multiple visits is necessary. And you've seen what happens when we get this wrong. You have seen what happens when an airplane is delayed on takeoff, and then crucially, you get to the point where the plane will no longer be able to land before the required resting time of that crew. And now a new task of go get a different crew is now added into the process. Could this have been anticipated an hour earlier? It could have. It should have. And building systems that do anticipate these things better than our current manual processes do, I think is where we're really going to start to see major appreciated, perceived value from these things, because they won't miss that point. They will be working backwards from, at any given point, if the plane hasn't departed by now, you'd better be anticipating that you're going to need a new crew. And if the estimated time to repair is an hour from now, and that time is past the threshold, you should start working now on making sure that the replacement crew is being identified and moved across town. This is where I think it's going to get really exciting. Frankly, I think it's going to be possible to do these things better than our current processes can do them because of the divisions among the silos, but only because we've already got this kind of wiring in place to do these multi-process, multi-system orchestrations. So you can have an agent that can update a customer record. We did this for this customer. Flagging the inventory issue. Because we sent this customer a replacement unit, we have one less unit in inventory. You better make sure that is notified to the production and stocking people. Having the service ticket all handled. Maybe the customer was entitled to have that request handled free, maybe not. You got to figure out if you're going to be needing to bill for that. And what this all comes to is what I quoted George Gilbert last year as saying that talking about agents individually is like talking about microservices. Every time you go to the Amazon.com page, multiple hundreds of services. Every time I give a number, people say, no, it's more than that. So probably somewhere at this point, around 800 different services are interoperating without human direct supervision to render what's not even really a web page, but to show you what Amazon thinks you might usefully or profitably be shown. And an agent control framework is going to be so key to this. Any demonstration of an agent using a data source to do a single thing is an existence proof, but it's not really a production ready capability. And this goes into the physical world. This is not just about digital silos, systems, processes, and the idea that we need to be able to have, for example, multiple robots collaborating around the construction of an automobile, not by individually planning the motions of each robot. You've seen drone shows. Can you imagine what it would be like to try to construct a drone show by having every individual trajectory of every drone have to be modeled and having to have a person execute a process to make sure the drones do not collide? The authoring tools for drone shows and the kinds of things that are being described here with this technology called robo ballet allow you to do much higher level authoring of an aggregate result you're trying to accomplish, and then have the system go out to the fingertips and say, okay, well, you guys are going to have to go around each other to make that happen. And the idea that it's going to be able to learn principles of coordination rather than having to be prescribed specific sequences of movement is going to be absolutely necessary to doing these things at any other level than trivial demonstrations. Now, I said we were going to be sharing some lessons learned. We are past the end of the beginning on this. We now have over a year just at Salesforce of doing this as our own, customer zero exercise. And what we found, among other things, is that if you give a person more than one set of facts, they will look at them, and if they seem to be in disagreement, they will apply various intuitive rules, like which one came from a more reliable source, or which one is more recent, or which one seems to be more specifically applicable to the current situation, and they will reconcile. When machines try to reconcile inconsistent facts, they wind up hallucinating. This is something we've found. So it's really important not to present them with inconsistent, interfering sets of facts. And to do that, you're going to need to focus very heavily on what I call the sweeping the floor problem. If you have a relatively clean room and you start to sweep the floor, by the time you've gotten to a corner, you're kind of grossed out by how much dirt turns out to have been spread around that floor. And when you get it all together in the corner, it looks pretty bad. Many companies now are discovering that as they try to bring the data together so that it can be used for non-trivial agentic applications, they are discovering inconsistencies. They're discovering time lags where old knowledge base articles and new knowledge base articles are both in the system and are equally accessible to an agent, where things that are in different places wind up being available on different time scales. And they're realizing how important it is to get the data intelligently coordinated and correct. And I believe that if you see data on the fraction of companies that plan AI investments in the next 12 months, which was something like 90% 2 years ago and is now more like 60% now. I don't believe that's because they're less interested in AI. I think they're more aware of how much spade work is going to be needed before the AI has something to do. And in many cases, once that spade work is done, they'll get a lot of the return that they thought they would need AI to do. And so it's very much a two-step process of get the processes well defined, and then and get the data well coordinated, and then start looking at the value that can be added by an agentic capability. In particular, plugging it into your internal databases. This is something the Financial Times just recently observed. Plugging it into internal databases instead of using general purpose tools trained on general purpose and uncurated data, I think is a crucial distinction. And people who are saying, oh yeah, we're going to use, pick your general purpose AI tool of choice. I don't want to name any competing products because that's just rude. But anything that is not focused on data that you own and therefore can use without concerns about intellectual property issues, that you can trust without concerns about accuracy issues, that you can govern and maintain and purge of redundancy and inconsistency, is going to make an enormous difference in the quality of the results you're going to get. Because agency has to build on initiative. I showed you earlier, and there it is on the left side of the screen, the blue curve of interest in the word agentic. Yeah, but look at the interest during that same period of time in the phrase generative AI. People aren't less interested in generative AI. Agents are only interesting. Agents only become something more than chatbots when they have the capability. I don't know if you want to call it creativity or if you want to call it the ability to surprise us or whatever, that generative AI demonstrably gives us. And when you are looking for agents to do something that they weren't told in advance to do, but that they were able to, I hate to anthropomorphize, figure out would be a good idea, that's going to depend on the underlying capabilities that are called generative AI, whether or not it has agentic mechanisms wrapped around it. And that in turn is going to depend on knowledge, because here's a phrase that we've been using for a while, that yellow curve, machine learning. If you want generative AI to do interestingly creative things instead of stupid, dumb, nonsense creative things. You need to be mastering and continuing to curate your techniques and practices of machine learning to ingest the right data in mathematically consistent ways at scale with high accuracy and performance. And all these problems that we've been talking about now for 10 or 20 years about the privacy considerations, about the legislative and regulatory mechanisms of whether it's right to be forgotten under GDPR or other mechanisms under other legal regimes. Machine learning makes all of this possible. Generative AI makes it interesting. Agentics makes it able to do stuff instead of just telling us what would be useful to do. And all three of them continue to be necessary. They might sound like successive fads. Oh, yeah, we were talking about machine learning, but then we got into generative AI. And now we're talking about agentics. No, I'm sorry, it is not a sequence. It is an accumulation. The job continues to grow rather than moving from one shiny object to the next. And knowledge is a very threatened thing right now. This is an example that just crossed my radar this morning. In 2003, they added a Greenlandic language addition to Wikipedia. It's not a language spoken by very many people. As it turns out, there are 1,500 articles in Greenlandic in Wikipedia, except that many of them, in the opinion of the curator of that edition, seem to have been copy pasted by machine translation, and they have mistakes and they have complete garbage where a machine translator didn't know the Greenlandic term for something and put in something essentially random. And the problem is that now this is the database that AIs and generative language models are training on to think, oh, this is how you speak the Greenlandic language. It's bad. I mean, you've got robots that are excreting their waste products, which is then becoming the food for other robots. And the spiral, the vicious spiral of bad knowledge becoming the training material for things that generate even worse, quote, knowledge, unquote, is not an academic consideration at this point. The need to know the source and the trustworthiness of the data that's being fed to your machine learning mechanisms to be built upon by your generative mechanisms, to be acted upon by your agentic mechanisms, is going to be what makes the difference between stupid technology tricks and amazing value. There was a study that was widely quoted quite recently about the huge percentage of AI projects that are not returning value to companies. You only had to get 2 paragraphs into that study to find out that it was companies that didn't get the data right or that were adding agentic speed to a badly designed process and other things like that. The agentics are not the problem. The agentics are exposing other underlying problems, which is a big, big difference. And ultimately, it's about, is the help it's giving you actually relevant? I could have picked almost any word here, but it turns out that over the last year, people have been way more worried about tariffs than they've been worried about machine learning, generative AI, or agentics. There are things people want to get done, and if we lose sight of those and think that our job is to deliver shiny objects, we will be doing the wrong thing. There are times when a simple, correctly phrased SQL query is going to give you everything you need, and a badly structured SQL query will take a long time at a high cost to give you the wrong result. Adding agentics to the wrong SQL query will not fix it. And the degree to which we need to continue to remind ourselves about the outcome being achieved, not the technology being deployed, is just going to be intensified by the power that agentics bring us. Because it's about delivering tangible results. This is a list that I probably would have devised something very similar to this if I hadn't run across it literally yesterday from Matt Peters over on LinkedIn. And it's so good that I'm just going to quote it and attribute it to him. Map the flow first. If you don't know what the agent is doing by looking at people doing it, it's unlikely that you're going to build an agent that delivers results that please you. Name a measurable change that you're going to accomplish. This is interesting. Say, hey, we are going to achieve a 10% improvement in first call resolution. That's measurable. We are going to achieve a reduction in time to ship a correct order. state a goal and hold yourself to that goal so your definition of success doesn't just become, well, we deployed AI. Put the help out there. If you want people to try it, have someone working with them who keeps them from feeling stupid the first time they try it, because someone who's tried it and felt stupid will from then on be looking for reasons not to use the new thing. They'll say, oh, I tried it, didn't work. I don't have time to waste my time debugging your silly toy. No, forward deploy the people who are able and desiring to be helpful in helping people get over those speed bumps, and be testing all the time. Constantly, constantly, constantly testing, because it's in the nature of these things that, unlike old IT, where once it's been built and tested and deployed, it does the same thing until you change it. These things are designed to evolve their behavior. As a normal side effect of normal use, they change what they do. They do not give the same answer to the same question asked 5 minutes later, because they know different stuff now. Or the fact that you're asking again becomes part of their set, and they say, oh, okay, well, that first answer isn't what they needed. Let me try refocusing the answer. Testing is different from now on. It's not a one-shot deal where we went through the list of tests, it passed the test, therefore it can be deployed and run forever until we change it. It's changing itself all the time. And ultimately, this is not a conversation about these things replacing people, even though that comes up all the time. It's about filling gaps of talent. There is no industry sector. Oh, people talk all the time about customer support and programming as the things that agents will do. I'm sorry, look at the list of employers expecting to be unable to attract the talent they need. 22% of healthcare, 38% of retail, 50% of advanced material engineering and chemical formulation don't believe that the talent pipelines that were badly damaged by COVID, badly damaged by increasing complexity of international study. Talent shortage is on the minds of every industry sector. And if these things can help us do things that previously used to require talented people to do, working with talented people, not instead of them, the value. We're talking about the talent shortage being estimated to cost literally trillions of dollars in revenue opportunity for legitimate, useful things to do, like public sector services, like education, like healthcare, like improved forest management and climate change mitigation. This is not about just making more stuff that goes into the landfills and burning more fuel that goes into the carbon footprint. These are things we actually want to do, that we don't have the pipelines of talent that we used to have that can keep up with the demands of people while respecting the limitations of the planet. And that's why I think this is a really great conversation to be having, even in my new role at the foundation, which is now the number one focus of my energy. And those of you who are wondering what that little logo was at the top of the screen, the title I'm using now is one that I've actually had for several years, but it's now my number one role instead of my side hustle. We are a private foundation, a nonprofit focused on specific needle-moving partnerships. We don't fund research into the problem. We fund action on the problem in areas including predominantly climate change mitigation, because we don't get that right, almost nothing else matters, but also STEAM education, exploration of Earth and space, areas where we think it's just vitally important. We want to have a world in which we want to do business, in which we want to live, and these are the things that are, as I say, on my mind these days. Thank you for the chance to be the first group that's seen a presentation with my new trade dress at the foundation in it. This is a signal event for me to be able to speak to you in this role, and I appreciate the return invitation, and I hope we'll get to do this again next year. Meanwhile, we've got some time now for Q&A, so I'm going to unshare this screen, and then we will talk until about 15 minutes from now, and I've got a hard stop, or sooner if you get tired of me sooner.
Thank you, Peter. That was very insightful. And I did not know about like the 10-10, like it's a smiley face.
Psychological tests show that people react to it as if someone is smiling at them. It's just one of those things.
Do we have any questions? If you have any questions, feel free to unmute.
What are some other things that stump AI?
You want the list alphabetically or chronologically, as Sherlock Holmes asks in one of the movies. What are the things that stump AI? It often doesn't handle language idioms very well. For example, the phrase "you're fired" does not mean you've been placed in a kiln until your glaze can correctly form, even though that's one of the definitions of that verb. It does not mean that you've been impacted at the base of your cartridge to expel a projectile, even though when a gun is fired, that's what that means. I mean, idiomatic language is something that people infer. Roger Schenck called it the framing problem, that if you can accurately understand the context in which language is being used, natural language understanding becomes much easier. But a person knows when they walk into a restaurant what the phrase a hamburger is going to imply, as opposed to a user interface designer who knows that the hamburger menu is those three little bars at the top right corner of the screen. Context is enormously important. It's amazing how much IQ you can get along without if you are correctly reading the context of the situation. And conversely, we all know people with immensely high IQ who are terrible at reading context and wind up doing things that are really unfortunate. We see this happen with human intelligence all the time. If you can read context, you can function well. If you can't, then IQ won't save you. So that would be my most general statement, is that helping AI understand context. There's a thought experiment that was done years ago about teaching a robot to solve problems. And at the end of the thought experiment, the robot is spending all of its time enumerating all the things that it shouldn't have to worry about. Oh, let's see, I guess the color of the doorknob doesn't actually matter to whether I can open the door or not, things like that. And the thing I invite you to imagine is that when you're walking down the street and you pass a 7-Eleven, you might suddenly remember that you used your last quart of milk that morning. You have not been thinking all day, got to remember to buy milk, got to remember to buy milk. And yet, the act of seeing a place where you can get it somehow makes that knowledge surface when you can take action on it without you having been burdened by cognitively processing that all day. When we can build code and run it on hardware that does that as well as you do it, that's going to be really cool. And I don't know anyone who thinks that we've even begun to define that problem properly yet, let alone solve it. Context. That's what AI does badly. It's getting better, but it still doesn't do what we expect an elementary school child to be able to do.
So Peter, if I can jump in here.
Please.
Maybe our problem is that, computer people are too science-based and humanity is much more variable. It's like, look at, 1010, they can't tell that that's just a picture versus a time that's being told. Same thing with how do you spell labor? Is it L-A-B-O-R, L-A-B-O-U-R, which is the English spelling, which is theoretically where our language came from. So maybe it's the human beings who want the shortcuts, say, I want one answer. And, maybe this is what computers were like in the 70s and early 80s when we had DOS.
Well, you're really talking about, what you're really talking about here is the future of work, and whether any specialist in any domain is really going to be able to do what needs to be done in a world where almost all problems worth solving require the orchestration of multiple specialties. Tom Malone at the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence has looked at this question about what's the IQ of a group. And it is not the maximum IQ of a member of the group. It is not the average of a member. It is a different thing that is based on the degree of social interaction among the members, their ability to hear each other instead of just waiting for the other one to stop talking so they can say what they wanted to say. There are processes that can be studied, but as yet are poorly understood, and they're not taught in academic circles. Most of the time, you don't take your first course on how to run an effective meeting until you're out there in the workforce doing actual damage because you run your meetings so badly. In theory, we ought to be teaching people explicit skills of collaboration at least as early as we teach them subject matter knowledge. And I find it fascinating that the applicants I get now when I do my interviews every year for MIT, the ones who come to me having done an Eagle Scout service project or a Girl Scout Gold Award project, or they've been in a FIRST robotics team, or they've been the captain of a sports team and functioning as an assistant coach to their adult coach, the collaborators, the ones who can turn a group into more than the sum of its parts, have a tremendous edge in the multidisciplinary and contentious, different stakeholders with different goals that we're facing now. Look at what's happening right now in the LA area as the question is examined about how to rebuild the areas west of LA that were so badly damaged in the fire earlier this year. If you're in real estate, there's ways you want to do that. If you're in firefighting and public safety, there are things you don't want them to do because they would just reproduce the past problems. And if you're on the economic and equality side, you've got major concerns because you've got a home that burned down that's in the third generation of ownership, whose present owners can't afford to rebuild and bring up to code and own that property. And there's a massive social equity problem to be solved. No
And
one
maybe
of
that's,
no one of those
maybe,
problems can be solved without someone being willing to compromise. Compromise is maybe the other thing that AI does badly, to answer the other question. AI does context badly, and AI does compromise badly.
so maybe that's the future of AI, that we're going to move from specialized knowledge where you have a question and you want the perfect answer to, your agents, which specialize. One agent specializes here, another one agent
We're
specializes
already,
here,
if that's not
you
even
know.
future tense, we're already going there. What we found at Salesforce was that we had agents that did things, but then you had a new problem of how do I find the agent that does the thing I want? And so now we're already building layered architectures. There's this thing called an employee agent whose expertise is in finding and assembling the single purpose agents that do other things. So already, like I said before about the layered architecture that jerks your finger away from the hot object, this is not a hypothetical. We're doing that already.
So you're working on a collaborative layer, or you're
Yes.
just deciding which is better?
No. We are actively building layered architectures in which an agent's job is to identify and integrate subsidiary agents. We're already working on I don't even want to call them hierarchies because they're not. Interestingly, Marvin Minsky back in 1987 used the expression society of mind, and one of his favorite, I think it was he who said, mind is something your brain does. If you look at reading in your brain, your visual processing, your verbal processing, several centers of the brain are all lighting up and interacting in different ways. And the mechanism of your brain has different pieces doing different stuff in different ways and orchestrating the result. And mind is a behavior of your brain, not a function of it.
I think you got it. I think it's the cognitive mind versus the physical actions of the brain.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying the next step is, or
Yeah.
like you're saying, it's already coming.
There are existence proofs for this, and it's vitally important that we treat that as something to do at the beginning and then populate that archipelago or that society of mind with capability instead of building the capability and hoping to stitch it together later.
Thanks, Peter.
So sequence matters. Realizing where we're going and building architectures that can handle what we want them to be instead of saying, well, we'll get to that later, is tremendously important to having this happen in a reasonable amount of time. Because the problem is, as I've indicated, if people have a bad experience with this, they don't remain neutrally interested in what you'll do next. They might become actively opposed to what you're doing, and anything that delays adoption. Adoption is so key. I was looking the other day for an example of a behavior of senior executives saying to their administrative assistant, I need you to print off my emails so I can mark them up and then you can, type back my answers. And I found something that was actually only 15 months old, where someone says, I've been in human resources for 27 years and I still have to print out emails for my CEO because she finds search too cumbersome. And if you've got even one person in a 5-person or 10-person group that's responsible for a result, if one of those people is operating at the speed of print it, mark it up, and type it back in tomorrow, then the whole process is held down to that slow pace. So adoption is not a luxury. Anticipating obstacles to adoption and dealing with them proactively is going to have an enormous impact on how well the technology can perform, because even one rock in the apple barrel is gonna make you check every single apple to be sure it's not the rock. And if I got excited about that, it's because this is so key. You get people who are very, very good at doing the thing they do and think that if they do that twice as well, it's going to make the whole thing work better. And no, at some point, making your thing better isn't going to have any effect at all, because you're not dealing with what the actual obstacle is, which is adoption, or what the actual obstacle is, which is data quality, or what the actual obstacle is, which is inability of regulators to get out of your way. And I don't mean that they should not regulate. I mean, they should regulate in ways that are constructive and useful instead of outdated and merely interfering. Long answer to a short question, but thank you for the question. I'm perfectly happy to respond to questions via LinkedIn or other channels if anyone's got a question that they don't feel can be asked or answered in this context. I'm easy to find. Also, as I routinely promise, the material that I've shown tonight, I hope you weren't frantically trying to screenshot that or take notes, but the slides will be available. And Neela, I believe you're going to make a recording of this available as well.
Yes, so we'll put recording and the slides on our AITP website.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any more questions?
I have another question if no one else does. How do you recommend that organizations test and monitor agentic AI systems, given their evolving nature and their adaptive nature?
Well, it helps to have definitions of success. If your definition of success is faster first call resolution, if your definition of success is being able to meet your seasonal peak loads with half the normal level of peak hiring, or cutting the training costs because now people have an agent supporting them and accelerating their onboarding. If you don't define success, you're never going to know if you had it. So definitions of success are worth some time to get right. And then an understanding, as General Stanley McChrystal famously said, there's no limit to the level of cooperation you'll get when people know that the purpose of investigation is learning and not punishment. So those are two things you need to do: have definitions of success and create a culture in which it's understood the purpose of testing is learning, not criticism and punishment. If you get those two things right, then people will be surprisingly constructive and creative and forthcoming about suggesting effective testing regimes. And that's what you're going to need, is people close to the coalface who say, hey, this is what it's doing badly. We need to test for this. If you try to anticipate ahead of time what needs to be tested, that implies that you're automating rather than agentifying. This isn't a bad thing, but if you think you're agentifying and all you're really doing is automating with AI tools, you're not going to get the results that you've been hoping to get.
How have you run into that at Salesforce, for example?
Well, we're pretty good about not having that happen. I mean, at Salesforce, the culture. It's hard to figure out whether to speak in present or past tense because I'm not completely off my off ramp yet there. So I'm gonna speak in present tense. At Salesforce, there is a culture based on a planning tool called the V2 MOM, Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, Measures, in which everyone understands that at the level of the organization, at the level of the departments, at the level of the teams, at the level of the individuals, every single year, eventually, it migrates its way through the org chart. Every single person has made a statement of, this is why I think I'm here. These are the values that are going to constrain my pursuit of that purpose. These are the methods that the competencies I'm going to develop and strengthen to achieve that purpose. These are the obstacles I anticipate, which might be, collaborative requirements I need to get met by other people. And finally, these are the measures by which I will state whether I feel I was successful this year or not. If you get that culture built, many things become more doable. And when people ask how Salesforce achieved the growth it did during its first 20 years without choking on its own waste products, I think people would tell you that that culture is absolutely core to its success. And now that we're asking algorithms to start collaborating like people, we need to develop the same kind of tools for defining success, anticipating challenges, and proactively building cultures that are designed to achieve good results and not to find excuses not to try hard things. That pretty much gets us to the end of our time, so I'm probably going to have to throw it back to you, Nelu, to close us out. Thank you all again for the chance to be with you.
Thank you, Peter, for a great presentation. And if you have any more questions, you can connect with Peter on LinkedIn, but we will be sharing slides and recording on our website. Jay, you want to say something about the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Peter, again for giving such a great presentation today. I think there's a lot of value in here for everyone that attended.
I appreciate that.
For
I always
everyone,
blow my own mind at least as much as I blow yours, so thank you.
well, for everyone that has attended and is still on, we'd really appreciate it if we got some feedback from you on today's event. All of our surveys really help us in making our future presentations better. And there is a QR code if you want to scan that with your phone. I've also, or check the chat. I've also put the link directly there. It's just a Google Forms, super quick survey. We'd love to hear what you thought.
Jay, when is our next in person?
Yes, so our next in person, and here's what I'll do now. Let me just go back to a slide we had earlier. Our next in person is going to be coming up in October. It's October 29th. It's a Wednesday. And it's going to be held at the Veterans Memorial in Culver City. And our speaker is going to be Holly Choi, which is exciting. And she'll basically be talking about the issues in the entertainment industry and what it's facing as AI emerges as a player in the game. So she'll talk about how it's being used, how it's being misused, and affecting the industry. She'll talk about pain points and business uses, content creation, talk about the regulatory and compliance issues, and stuff everyone is excited and afraid about. So it should be great.